Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. I hope everyone's having a lovely Thanksgiving. I hope everyone's full, and if not, getting full. My dinner is not going to be ready for another couple of hours because Jeff decided to start crockpot chicken at 3 in the afternoon. Anyway, I've got one heck of a second upload for you today. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and the membership are in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. Finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first part of the upload. Before I talk about the werewolf of Bettembourg, let me tell you about the white wolf of Luxembourg. During my time with the U.S. Army, I took a nice R&R break to Paris, France, with a stopover in Luxembourg. The year was 1974. I was stationed at Merle Barracks in Nuremberg, Germany. The thing that's nice about being stationed in Germany is there were so many European countries close to Germany, and it was so easy for me to travel here and there. Travel was inexpensive when you're in the Army, and I definitely took advantage of all the travel deals the Army threw my way. Being stationed in Germany, I met a German girl named Hilda from Luxembourg. She invited me to Luxembourg and promised to show me all of the sights. When I arrived, I was given an assignment. I, at the time, was working for the CID, Criminal Investigation Division, DST, Drug Suppression Team. I was an MP, working undercover narcotics. My code name in the CID was Pork Chops. CID asked if I was going to Luxembourg, if I could go to the discotheque and try and locate the drug supplier to Army soldiers, nicknamed Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Feelgood was supplying Army soldiers in Nuremberg with black opium hash, tripping green hash, and brown bombers, a type of barbiturate. I agreed that I would try to seek out Dr. Feelgood and make a controlled purchase from him. I met up with the German girl named Hilda, and she showed me some of the sights of Luxembourg. We even visited the Vedian Castle and the Victor Hugo Literary Museum. In the evening, we went to the discotheque and that Dr. Feelgood would frequent. While at the discotheque, I tried to locate Dr. Feelgood without any success. This was the first time I'd ever went to a European disco. What I did learn was watching the dancers dance to disco music, songs like Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation, and the other songs like Do It by BT Express, Lady Marmalade, Kung Fu Fighting, etc. I was amazed watching the dancers execute their fancy steps. Little did I know that CID later on in my career would send me undercover to various discos throughout Germany. Seeking out drug dealers while watching these dancers, I became a dancer myself. I became a very good dancer, winning first place in various dance contests. When I got out of the Army in 1976 and went stateside, my first job I landed was with Arthur Murray's dance studio as a dance instructor. Later, I would go for the Guinness Book World Records and danced 205 hours, 8.5 days, holding the record for over a month before I was beat by a disco dancer in South Africa. My first attempt at gaining the world record was by dancing 72 hours. This was not good enough, and I eventually attempted the world record and succeeded with 205. But this is not about my career in disco dancing, just the fascination of paranormal. Many Europeans have stories of the paranormal, and Hilda was no exception. Hilda told me about a story about how her brother, when he was 12 years old, encountered a white wolf in Luxembourg. And that white wolf actually attacked him and left claw marks on his chest. I had an opportunity to meet Hilda's brother, and he opened his shirt to show me the scars on his chest from this white wolf. I learned that stories of wolves and werewolves were common in Luxembourg, as well as many other countries in Europe. This is the story of the werewolf in Bettembourg. Bettembourg is a commune and town in southern Luxembourg. Apparently, a creature of some kind believed to be a werewolf prowls the hills of Bettembourg, and it howls, and they can still be heard today. Here is the story behind the legend. A young man who was supporting his elderly parents went off to war. The townfolk heard nothing from this young man, and the townfolk wondered if he was still alive. His elderly parents, very concerned about the whereabouts of their son, and wondered if he was killed in the war. The parents, broken-hearted, passed on. It had been many years since they had last saw their son. Their son became a forgotten memory to the townfolk. On one given day, a disabled soldier came down the road to Bettembourg. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was evident that this disabled soldier had witnessed horrifying things and had undergone nightmarish times. His eyes were full of shock and horror. He was cursing underneath his breath as he approached the town. The disabled soldier finally took a seat and kept mumbling to himself. He spied a crucifix made of stone and, like a crazy man, started throwing stones at the crucifix. The disabled soldier acted like he was possessed by a demon. He destroyed the stone cross, and then after the destruction of the cross, he left the town of Bettembourg. From that day on, the town of Bettembourg became haunted by a savage, horrific beast that looked like a wolf. This wolf would violently slaughter any living animal or human crossing its path. The townfolk no longer thought this to be a wolf. They made the determination that it was actually a werewolf. A monk asked the townfolk to create silver bullet to kill this werewolf. On the silver bullet they would engrave holy names of the Bible. The townfolk sought out one of their own, a marksman who was known to have an accurate shot when hunting deer. The townfolk marksman made good with his expertise with the rifle and killed the werewolf. To the surprise of the villagers, when they approached the dead body of the werewolf, it transformed into the crazy disabled soldier. The dead disabled soldier was cremated and prayers were said over his ashes. The villagers spread his ashes in an unknown location, and the town was never terrorized by a werewolf again. There are some townfolk who still make the claim that they can still hear the howling of this werewolf at night. So with stories like this, I only wonder if the white wolf of Luxembourg could also be a werewolf. Now, the reason why I wanted to share that with you, and I thought it was important, is because we hear so many folklore from America. And, the majority of us, our heritage is from European countries. And we kind of lost touch with the old stories from across the sea. And I found it very interesting because, there's so many Dogman encounters from America, and we just get caught up in those, but the European ones are just as interesting and just as terrifying and older. This one wasn't too old, but still old enough. But just so crazy. Just really interesting. I hope you guys liked it. I'm going to share some more encounters with you, but I really liked it, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So if you didn't like it, I apologize. If you did, that's awesome. Today's second encounter. My name is Derek Randalls. I'm 44 years old, and I live in Washington. I'm the co-founder of the Olympic Project in Washington State, and I've researched Sasquatch since a sighting and encounter I had in 1985. The encounter I'm going to share happened in the late 90s, I believe 1998. I had seen renowned anthropologist Grover Krantz on television discussing Bigfoot, and was so intrigued that I made a trip to his house in Edmonds, Washington, to pick his brain. To be honest, I invited myself over. At that time, Grover, I believe, was a professor at Washington State University in Pullman. I'd always wanted to talk with him about many things, but one major question I had was about ways he imagined one could attract or lure a Sasquatch into the field. We sat down and talked. I asked many pointed questions. One of them was where, in his opinion, was the best place to encounter a Sasquatch. He did not hesitate to answer. McCall, Idaho. I found that interesting, and it made sense, as McCall was still a remote part of Idaho. Right after I asked him, if you went to such a place, what, in your opinion, could you do to possibly attract a Sasquatch or lure to your position? He chuckled and said, well, maybe a baby crying. I replied, wow, that's interesting. He went on to describe how if I made a tape of a baby crying, got to a remote location where I knew they existed, played the tape, and, if the circumstances were right, I could draw a Sasquatch in. As I sat and listened to him, a light bulb went off in my head. I returned home, and the very next night, using a cassette recorder, recorded my young son, who happened to cry a lot. I got a good bit of him crying, then turned it into a looped tape, which I could play continuously until the cassette ran out. Armed with what I thought was an ingenious idea, I headed out for an area called Burnt Fork in the Blue Mountains. I had heard about Burnt Fork because it was where Paul Freeman, a Sasquatch researcher in the area at the time, had investigated sightings and encounters some hunters had with a Sasquatch. Now, I figured if I was going to find a Sasquatch, this would probably be one of the best places to go. I drove to the area, put on my backpack, and started out on my hike. I have to say, for the area is vast and remote. I hiked for approximately 6 hours in one direction until I got down to the bottom of a ravine. I looked around and thought, this is perfect. As far as I could surmise, this was close to the area where the hunters had their encounter the hunting season prior. It was getting late in the day, so I immediately set up where I'd be waiting. I found a large tree approximately 60 feet above the bottom of the ravine. With a good and clear vantage point, a creek ran through the base of the ravine, and the area around it was mostly open except for brush that sat on the opposite side, which still about 8 to 10 feet. I took off my pack and settled in. Armed with a Sony night shot camera that had a Generation 3 night vision monocular, which married up to a front of my camera, I was prepared to record anything I encountered or that happened. I had gotten the camera from Jeff Meldrum, professor of anthropology at Idaho State University, 1 or 2 years before when he invited me to join the North American Ape Project to do some investigation for the group. The camera at the time was really state-of-the-art stuff. To this day, it's really an amazing piece of equipment. From my position, I looked around and thought that I found a good spot. It didn't take long for it to start getting dark, and it was then that I had my first reservations about what I was doing. Many questions soon came. Was this a good idea? Was this a bad idea? Was I stupid? I pushed those questions out of my mind temporarily and waited. Quickly, it got very dark. I was pretty tired from the hiking and the drive up earlier in the day. I was hoping I could stay awake for a while to see if this was going to work and was worth it. Before long, it was pitch black. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the creek running down the ravine below. Finally, I decided to do what I set out to do, so I turned my cassette player on. I immediately noticed the acoustics from my particular spot were very good. As my son's cries carried through the air, I could tell it was going a long distance. This was good because if I was going to lure something in, it needed to go far. In fact, as I sat and listened, I was impressed that the crappy recorder I was using worked so well. After probably about an hour, it was getting more and more difficult to listen to my son crying over and over and over again. I was also starting to get a bit of a headache. I let it go on for a bit longer, did a battery change, and fired it back up. More time went by, I can't recall how long, but it was getting late and I was having a tough time staying awake. I really was ready to turn off the crying because my headache was getting worse, but I decided to hang on a little longer. I figured I'd come all this way. I should take it as long as possible before quitting. Suddenly, on the range opposite of where I was sitting, a loud crash sounded. I perked up. Any signs of fatigue vanished in that moment. I reached into my pack out of an abundance of caution and pulled out my pistol. I always pack a firearm when I go into the wilderness, and this wasn't unlike any other time. So I got out my pistol and made myself ready. My son's cries were still going, as I hadn't stopped playing the recorder, but the crashing on the opposite side of the ridge was also still there. 5 minutes or so went by, and the crashing was still echoing through the ravine. But it was now getting louder as whatever was making the noise advanced towards me, or should I say towards the sound of my son's cries. It was then that I started to seriously evaluate the question. What the hell was I doing out here? And, to be honest, my judgment. I was a long way out in the woods, a good 6 to 8 hours away from anyone and vulnerable. I was also trying something that, as far as I knew, had never been tried before. As the crashing got louder and louder, I grew more tense and nervous. I got my camera ready to start filming, but I also had my pistol as well, just in case. The sounds of the crashing grew louder. I was now beyond just tense. My hands began to shake, and fear began to grip me. It then dawned on me that whatever was coming wasn't really coming for me, but to the cries. It was coming to the cries of my infant son. My mind was racing. I asked myself, is this a Bigfoot? Is it two Bigfoot? Is it a bear? What is it? The sounds grew in volume, as did my fear. At this point, I couldn't stop questioning my poor judgment. Like a locomotive, whatever it was had now reached the flat part of the ravine and was coming toward the creek. I could now tell it was on 2 feet, as I could hear the heavy and violent footfalls. If I could give an analogy, it sounded like a linebacker racing through the woods without regard for anything around it. I was now hanging on reality by a thread. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified as hell. I was frozen with fear, as there was zero doubt. Now this thing was running directly at me. All that was separating me from it was the creek and the brush that was probably about 15 to 20 feet wide and about 6 to 8 feet tall. My fear now reached a fever pitch by how loud it was now. I could have sworn it was almost on top of me. Unable to see my experiment through, I lost the nerve and shut the recorder off. The crashing stopped almost immediately, as if it came to a skidding halt on the opposite side of the creek and brush line. And when I say skidded halt, I swear I heard it slide. I probably didn't, but that's what it felt like at the time. Like it just slid to a full stop. The loud sounds of crashing were now replaced with deep, heavy, rasping breath. In and out, inhaled and exhaled. In my mind I thought, oh God, This thing is ready to come through this brush. Only 60 feet separated me from this thing. All it needed to do was punch through the brush, head up a slope 60 feet with nothing really in its way, and it would have me dead to rights. Doubts took over my troubled and terrible mind. Right then and there, I officially was done with doing research. I couldn't help but keep thinking how stupid I was, how dumb it was for me to even be out here, unprepared both mentally and probably even physically to deal with what was standing on the other side of the creek breathing. I was freaked out and didn't know what to do. In my trembling hands, I clenched my pistol in one and in the other held out the night shot camera, hoping to see just a little bit. All the while, I was waiting on pins and needles for this thing to crash through the brush and come and get me. I can't recall exactly when. Maybe it was around 3 or 4 minutes, but the sound of the breathing stopped, making it even more creepy. All I could think was this thing was possibly stalking me now, or worse, would jump out of the darkness at me. I can't say it enough. I was freaked out beyond compare. In my mind, I kept yelling at myself about how stupid I was and what a dumb decision this was to be alone and about 11 or 12 miles in. I knew I had a decision to make. Do I up and make a run for it, or do I just remain still? I opted for staying, so I waited and waited. I can't remember how long I sat there, quiet, my mind spinning before my fatigue caught up with me. But the next thing I remember was waking to birds chirping in the sunshine. I looked around, but nothing was there. The brush below looked as it did the night before. I could hear the creek running, and I was sitting in the same position I had been before I fell asleep. The fear and apprehension I had were gone. Sometime in my sleep they had melted away. I got to my feet and, with my sidearm on, headed down the creek. I went through the thick brush line, emerged on the other side, and immediately found 2 large impressions and quite a large, disturbed trail coming up to the spot. That moment, reality struck me. Those were Bigfoot tracks. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. Then my mind shifted to what would have happened if I hadn't turned the recorder off. Would I be here today? Would that thing have torn me apart? I quickly documented the tracks photographically, went back to the tree where I had spent the night, gathered my gear, and began the long hike out. On my 8-hour hike back, I never encountered anything else, but I did go back and forth about my judgment concerning what I had done, and if I'd have a future with research. Many years separate me from that moment, but I'll never forget it. I processed it in my brain over and over, and now realize just how overwhelmingly stupid and disrespectful it was. I know it sounds weird, but here I am using the cries of a baby to lure something in. But what I was really doing was toying with its emotions. Whatever I put it through wasn't fair or right. I'm not proud of that moment, not one bit. I feel ridiculous, and without a doubt, it was one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I'm really glad I turned the tape off because, I might not be here to tell this story if I hadn't. I don't know what I would have done, but I damn sure know what it was. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Guys, thank you for your support. Your support is what keeps this channel continuing to grow and go. Also, your guys' support is what makes this channel so special. You are the foundation of this platform, the heart and soul of the channel, so thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. If we share a little bit of information with the people that we love and care about, it may just save their life someday. Until next time, God bless you all.